I'd like to start this video off with a moment of silence for any unfortunate poor soul that gets assigned this book for class. This is the most complicated Platonic dialogue, to me anyway, and not a fun, complicated, but a frustrating one. That said, if you could comb through the BS that Plato throws at you while probably drunk, you do get some pretty interesting ideas on the nature of pleasure. Because we've all had experiences with pleasure, and if you haven't, then I'm really sorry, and you should probably do something else because you won't find it here with me. Pleasure, I think we intrinsically feel compelled emotionally towards, and yet sometimes we rationally think we should do better. Like, you know how you should be saving money, you know how you should be eating healthy, but damn it, when you see those golden arches, you break down. So perhaps Plato can give us some insights on the nature of pleasure, which we might reflect on the next time we come across the McDonald's in your life. So let's start with Plato's story time, setting up the stage of the dialogue. There's no introduction or anything, we're kind of just thrown in mid-argument, so I guess Plato kind of got tired of storytelling. Socrates is here though, and he's arguing with this guy Philebus. Philebus claims that pleasure is the highest good, while Socrates claims that knowledge is even better. Now for whatever reason, Philebus chickens out and gets his friend Protarchus to argue his point for him. So really it's more of a back and forth between Protarchus and Socrates. I don't know why this dialogue wasn't named Protarchus then, but whatever. Now our investigation starts a bit of a ways in, because a lot of this dialogue, especially early on, is all over the place. Like Plato's been hitting the wine bottle a bit too much. But after that we get our bearings and get a starting point into figuring out what pleasure is. Socrates thankfully provides. Pleasure and pain seem to me by nature to arise together in the common kind. In a yin-yang sort of way, pleasure and pain need each other, but it's much more than just yin and yang. Pain is the emptying, the destruction, the being without, while pleasure is the refilling, the creation, the being with. For example, we feel pain when we're hungry, and when we eat we feel pleasure. If you tried to eat on a full stomach, it wouldn't give you a lot of pleasure and might even cause some pain. But oh man, when you've been working hard all day and haven't had much to eat, then sit down at a Thanksgiving table, that's a magical feeling. Now, according to Socrates, the pleasure we get from this can be divided into two. When we experience pleasure, we experience bodily pleasure, but also the pleasure of the soul. Let's use another example of a hot tub after getting cold. Your body certainly feels nice, but it's also accompanied by mental pleasure. Now me, I can't think of an example of your body feeling good, but your mind not also feeling good at the same time. However, there are moments where your mind feels good, but your body doesn't. And that's Socrates' next point. We could experience solely mental pleasures and no bodily pleasure. For example, when it comes to memory. But now as for the other kind of pleasure, of which we said that it belongs to the soul itself, it depends entirely on memory. Now memory here is used pretty broadly, but even just thinking about reminiscing on things, we do get a mental pleasure that isn't also accompanied by a bodily pleasure. There's this really good dumpling place called Din Tai Fung, but I moved out of town so I can't get those dumplings anymore. But when I think about it, and getting them with some friends and having a good time, I do get a mental pleasure. But unfortunately, I do not get the bodily pleasure of those pork soup dumplings. But what about another example of mental pleasure? The one of expectation. Say Aubrey Plaza herself hits you up for a date. You get excited, you get dressed, and you're feeling good. This is a mental, or I guess in Socrates' case, soul exclusive pleasure. But wait a minute, you might ask. What happens when you actually show up to that date, realize Aubrey Plaza would never go out with a nerd like you, and it's actually just a catfishing and kidnapping operation? Well, that actually leads into Socrates highlighting what he calls false pleasures. Now this is the divergence moment. Let me ask you, do you think we should classify pleasures as either true or false? Or are pleasures just pleasures and that's that? If you fall in the latter camp, let's go over Socrates' ramblings to see if he convinces you otherwise. Here's, I guess, what we might call his introductory statement. Do you really want to claim that there is no one who, either in a dream or awake, either in madness or any other delusion, sometimes believes he is enjoying himself, while in reality he is not doing so, or believes he is in pain when he is not? My first thought when reading this was the phantom limb phenomenon. There's a psychological phenomenon where amputees might still feel sensations in their missing limbs, and these sensations can be painful. Although I haven't experienced the phantom limb phenomenon because I'm not an amputee, who am I to deny that they're experiencing actual real pain? Why should we call it a false pain? But okay, let's let Socrates make his case. So when we feel pleasure because of something. Likewise, when we judge, we make a judgment about something. Now we all, to Socrates, agree that judgments are either true or false. Why then should we not add this element of truth or falsity to pleasure? After all, there are examples we could think of where this might be the case. Socrates brings up the intensity of a pain or pleasure. You ever see some kid at the store crying because his stressed out mom won't buy him a toy? You intrinsically think to yourself, man, that kid's a brat. I'd hate to be that mom. You don't think, wow, that kid must be in so much pain that this reaction is totally appropriate. Nah, something about that situation makes you think that that pain response is not justified by not getting an Optimus Prime action figure. Now, if it was Soundwave though. Alright, so that's one example of us intrinsically thinking a pain or pleasure is false, in the sense that its intensity is not justified. What about being completely mistaken altogether, like in our Aubrey Plaza example? Actually, let me present a more relevant scenario. We got an election coming up. Only one candidate will get elected. One group of voters will be in pain and look at the joy the other group of voters will have and think they're mistaken about their joy. The other group will be joyful and look at the pain the other group is having and think that they're mistaken. But then this begs the question, what does it mean to be justified in your pleasure or pain response? Like fully, objectively, 100% justified. Because look around. We all have differing degrees of joy and pain responses to things. Don't get me wrong, I see where Socrates is coming from about intuitively feeling like someone's response to something isn't quite right, but I'm not bold enough to then set the standard for a correct, objective way of responding to things. That being said, I think the investigation is useful nonetheless. Even though we may not arrive at objectively correct rules on how or when to feel pain or pleasure, it's still helpful to reflect on our own emotions and wonder if we might be overreacting to something. Also, it's kind of fun. I mean, tier lists ranking fast food or Pop-Tart flavors differ from one another, and yet it's fun to reflect on what brings you joy or pain, even if you know it's not an objective proclamation or anything. But what do you think? Are there correct and incorrect pleasures? Are pleasures fully subjective and nothing more can be said? Or are you somewhere in between? Let me know your thoughts below. Don't trust any Facebook messages from Aubrey Plaza. Subscribe and like this video, and I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.